Welcome to another deep dive with us. This time we're going to be tackling knowledge versus truth. And this was sparked by a quote by Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
And he said, above all, don't lie to yourself. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to a point that he cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him, and so loses all respect for himself and for others. And having no respect, he ceases to love.
Wow.
Pretty intense, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's a powerful statement right there. That kind of sets the stage for what we're going to be talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
So to jump into that a little bit more, the source material that we have, there's this fictional dialogue between a student and a priest.
Uh-huh.
And right away, the priest lays it out there that mistaking our knowledge for truth is the foundation of self-deception.
Oh.
And I thought that was really interesting because, so much of what we talk about on the show.
We like to think that knowledge is the path to truth.
Yeah, for sure.
But it seems like in this case, they're saying that it can also be a tool of self-deception.
It's like, building a house on a shaky foundation. You got to have a good foundation if you're clinging to these so-called truths that are really just our own limited understanding.
Yeah.
Then, everything built on top of that is going to be unstable.
Right.
Yeah, I like that.
It reminds me of, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Right.
So it's like we can present all this information, but if somebody is stuck in their own limited understanding, they're never going to be able to see past that.
It's hard to change your mind sometimes when you're stuck with a belief.
Well, and, I was thinking about this as I was prepping for this episode.
Yeah, because it's like, how much of what I think I know is actually just knowledge and not truth? And that's where I started getting a little, tripped up because it's like, well, I need to have some kind of framework.
I know.
And understand the world, right? Like,
of course. No,
I definitely need knowledge. I don't know anything.
You need frameworks and models to kind of understand the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, how do we even tease that apart?
I think what they're saying in the dialogue is that knowledge is important.
Okay.
But it's not the end-all, be-all.
All right.
I mean, it's like this, and they use this analogy. Imagine truth is like the actual terrain of a landscape.
Okay.
Right. You got your mountains, you got your valleys, your rivers, all that stuff.
Okay.
Knowledge is like a map of that terrain.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Right. So, a map can be helpful, even essential for navigating that terrain.
Sure.
But it's not the terrain itself.
It's a representation.
Right. It's a representation of it.
Yeah, like sometimes our maps are accurate, right? They lead us where we want to go. We feel confident.
Exactly.
What happens if there's like a landslide?
Yeah.
And it like totally redraws the landscape?
Yeah, what if there's a new path forged that wasn't on our map?
Or we're using a map from, 100 years ago and it's completely different.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So we're in trouble, right? If we're only relying on these maps that may be outdated.
And that's the danger.
Brain complete.
Yeah, and that's the danger of mistaking knowledge for truth.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
It can make us rigid,
Uh-huh.
closed off
Right.
to new information,
Yeah.
resistant to changing our minds.
Right, because we think we already know.
You think you got it figured out?
You got it all figured out.
You got your map.
Yep, got my map.
You're good to go.
I'm good.
Yeah.
This is really making me think about all the maps I've been using in my own life.
Oh, yeah.
Beliefs I've held on to maybe for years that might not accurately reflect the terrain anymore. It's a little unsettling, to be honest.
Right.
But it's also kind of cool.
Yeah, it can be. It can be.
Because if we can recognize that, then we can start to update those maps.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Once you realize that your knowledge is just a representation of the truth, it's a tool, but it needs constant updating, refining.
Yeah.
Then you open yourself up to so much more learning and growth.
Yeah. So I'm curious in the dialogue, how did they even approach this?
The student throughout the conversation kept pushing the priest to clarify his points. Give concrete examples. Explain like how this idea of knowledge versus truth actually plays out in real life. And I think that that active questioning, that willingness to really engage with the ideas deeply seems to be a key part of this whole process.
So it's not just about passively taking in information. It's about
really wrestling with it, challenging it, and seeing how it connects to our own experiences.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So there's this one example that they talk about in this dialogue that I thought was really fascinating. And it's like such a simple thing.
Okay.
But the priest asks the student, what's 1 apple plus 1 apple?
Yeah.
And the student says 2 apples.
Of course. Basic math.
Seems straightforward.
Yeah, but then the priest challenges him
Yeah.
and says, well, what if we look at those apples
Okay.
on a molecular level? What if we're talking about atoms instead of whole fruits?
Oh, that's a good point.
Right.
Okay. I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then it's not so clear.
Suddenly the answer isn't so clear-cut.
Right, because it's like, well, from an atomic perspective,
Yeah.
it could be thousands or millions of atoms.
Could be a lot.
Yeah.
So how do we even know
So the
truth of that
the
agreement?
truth of that equation really depends on the framework we're using, right?
Okay.
The perspective we're taking.
Okay, so it's not that there isn't a right answer.
Well,
It's that the answer depends on the context.
yeah, the answer depends on the context.
Okay.
And that's the point the priest is trying to make, is that our knowledge, even about something as simple as, 1 apple plus 1 apple, is always framed
by our perspective, our assumptions, the way we're looking at it.
This is blowing my mind a little bit.
Yeah.
It's really making me rethink a lot of things.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a mind bend, for sure.
So before we get into what we can do about this, I want to touch on something that I saw in the comments.
Okay.
Because a lot of people had really interesting reactions to this idea of knowledge versus truth.
Yeah, and I think it really highlighted how it resonates on so many different levels,
Yeah.
Some people were talking about intentional ignorance.
Okay.
How sometimes, we might choose to not know something because it's easier or less painful than facing the truth.
It's like sticking your head in the sand.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to look at that.
It's too scary.
It's too scary.
I'm just going to pretend it's not there.
Yeah, and that's a whole other level of self-deception.
Right, because you're choosing to use that faulty map.
Exactly.
Even though you know it's faulty.
You know it's going to lead you to a destination you prefer.
But it's not real.
But it's not the real terrain.
Right.
Yeah.
And somebody else brought up
Yeah.
suppressing your emotions.
Oh, yeah.
As a form of self-deception.
That's a big one.
Because if you're not being honest with yourself about how you're feeling.
Totally. You're essentially creating this false map of your inner landscape.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
Which can lead to a lot of problems in our relationship.
And it can affect our behaviors.
Absolutely.
If we're not really checking in with how we're feeling.
And then there was this one comment that was just brilliant. They connected this whole discussion to a quote by Alfred Korzybski, who said, "A map is not the territory it represents."
I love that quote.
Oh, good.
And it really just perfectly summarizes.
It's perfect for this discussion.
Yeah.
It really is.
It really is.
Because our knowledge is always going to be an abstraction, a representation, but never the reality itself.
It's like a finger pointing at the moon.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not the moon.
Right.
Yeah, I like that.
I love those comments, though. It just goes to show you that the range of ways that people are grappling with these concepts,
Right, and how just bringing it up.
And it just shows the power of dialogue and how exploring these ideas together can lead to even deeper insights.
So recognizing the difference between knowledge and truth.
Yeah.
It's not just an intellectual exercise.
It is. Real world implications.
Sure.
For sure.
So I think it's time to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about what we can do with this newfound understanding of knowledge versus truth.
I like it.
Okay, so we've talked about how our knowledge can be like a map, helpful for navigating, but not the same as the actual terrain of truth.
Yeah.
And we've touched on how clinging to outdated maps can lead to self-deception. But now I'm really curious about how we can become more aware of our own maps and, more importantly, more open to updating them as we go.
That's the big question, right?
Yeah, like how do we actually put this into practice?
Yeah, that's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Right.
It's one thing to kind of get it intellectually, but it's another to actually live it.
So where do we even begin?
I think one of the most powerful things we can do is to cultivate a mindset of curiosity.
Okay.
It's about approaching the world with a sense of wonder,
Mm-hmm.
a willingness to question our assumptions, and a genuine desire to learn and grow.
It sounds so simple,
Yeah,
but I think you're right.
I think it's really powerful.
When we're curious,
Yeah,
we're naturally more open to new information,
exactly.
even if it challenges our existing beliefs.
And that openness is crucial
Yeah.
because it allows us to see our maps as works in progress,
Right.
subject to revision and refinement.
So they're not set in stone.
No, they're not set in stone.
It's like we're constantly updating them
Yeah,
as we learn and grow.
but as we gather more data.
This makes me think about how kids are so naturally curious.
Oh, yeah.
They're constantly asking why and how
Yeah.
and exploring the world with a sense of awe and wonder.
They don't
And somewhere along the way,
all those preconceived notions yet.
we kind of lose that childlike curiosity.
I think we do.
So how do we become more like those curious kids again?
I think one way is to actively seek out
Okay.
new experiences, new perspectives,
Yeah.
new information that challenges our existing ways of thinking.
So things like traveling to new places.
Yeah.
Reading books by authors we haven't encountered before.
Absolutely.
Having conversations with people who have different backgrounds and viewpoints.
Yeah, and it's not just about exposing ourselves to new things.
Okay.
But it's also about engaging with them actively,
How do we do that?
asking questions,
Okay.
digging deeper, trying to understand the underlying assumptions and perspectives that shape the information we're encountering.
So it's like we're becoming more like explorers,
I love that.
mapping out the terrain with fresh eyes, not
Yeah.
just relying on the old maps that might be leading us astray.
That's a great analogy. And it highlights another important point, which is
Right.
being willing to admit when we're wrong.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It is tough. It's a stumbling block for a lot of people.
Yeah, because we tend to attach our egos to our beliefs.
We do.
And it can feel really threatening to have
Yeah.
to admit that something I've believed for a long time,
Might not be entirely accurate.
it can feel like a personal attack almost.
We can.
Yeah.
So how do we get past that?
Well, I think the first step is realizing that
Yeah.
admitting we're wrong is not a sign of weakness.
Okay.
It's actually a sign of intellectual strength and humility.
So it's about prioritizing truth over ego.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
It means we're prioritizing truth over ego.
Yeah, because if we're always trying to protect our ego,
Yeah,
then we're never going to be open to new information.
we're going to miss out on
Yeah.
so much learning and growth.
So it's about detaching our sense of self-worth
Yeah.
from our beliefs.
It's okay to change your mind when
Yeah.
presented with new information.
That's a good point.
And that brings us to another important aspect of
Yeah.
cultivating intellectual humility,
Yeah.
which is developing a tolerance for ambiguity.
Ooh, that's another tough one for me.
It is. The world is,
I like things to be black and white.
yeah, well, the world's a complex
Yeah,
and messy place.
it is. And rarely are things black and white.
I know.
And learning to be comfortable with that ambiguity,
Okay.
with not knowing everything for
Yeah.
sure,
Yeah.
is really important.
So instead of trying to force everything into neat categories and clinging to rigid beliefs,
Yeah.
we should embrace the messiness
Yeah.
and be open to the possibility that there might be multiple truths.
Exactly.
Or at least multiple valid
Or
perspectives
multiple valid perspectives.
on any given issue.
Yeah. And that openness,
Okay.
that willingness to hold multiple perspectives in mind
Yeah.
is what allows us to engage
Yeah.
in more nuanced and productive conversations.
This is making me think about all the heated debates and arguments I've witnessed,
Yeah.
both online and in person,
Yeah.
where people seem so entrenched in their own beliefs
Yeah.
that they're unable to even consider
See,
the possibility that they might be wrong,
they can't see the other side.
or that there might be other valid ways of seeing things.
And that stems from
Yeah.
a fear of uncertainty
Yeah.
and a need to feel like we have all the answers.
Like we've got it all figured out.
Yeah, we got it all figured out.
Yeah.
But that kind of rigidity
Uh-huh.
can be incredibly destructive.
So how do we break free from that rigidity and become more comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty?
I think one way is to cultivate
Yep.
a practice of mindfulness.
Okay, so how do we do that?
This involves paying attention to our thoughts and feelings without judgment
Okay.
and becoming aware of our own biases and tendencies.
So it's like developing a kind of inner observer,
Exactly.
a part of ourselves that can step back
Yeah.
and witness our thoughts and emotions without getting swept away by them.
Without getting caught up in the drama of it all.
This is all starting to sound a lot like emotional intelligence.
It is.
Yeah.
Intellectual humility and emotional intelligence go hand in hand.
Yeah. It makes sense.
They really do.
Because the more in touch we are with our own emotions, the more likely we are to approach learning and growth with a sense of curiosity and open-mindedness.
Exactly.
This is really resonating with me. It's like we're talking about a whole new way of being in the world.
I think so too.
A way of approaching life with more curiosity, humility, and a willingness to embrace the unknown.
And that way of being, that commitment to ongoing learning and growth is ultimately what allows us to live more authentically and meaningfully.
I love that.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some practical tips for cultivating intellectual humility, I want to circle back to Dostoevsky's quote that sparked this whole exploration. He talked about how lying to ourselves can ultimately lead to a loss of self-respect and love.
Right.
How does that connect to what we've been discussing?
I think that's such a powerful point.
Yeah.
And it really gets to the heart of why this topic is so important. When we're constantly deceiving ourselves.
Yeah.
When we're clinging to beliefs that we know deep down are not true, we're essentially eroding our own integrity.
It's like we're breaking a promise to ourselves.
Yeah, betraying our own inner compass.
And that kind of betrayal can lead to a sense of shame and self-doubt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which can make it harder to love and respect ourselves.
And then that lack of self-respect can ripple outwards.
Yeah.
It can affect our relationships with others, our overall sense of well-being.
It's like we're building walls around ourselves.
Yeah.
Walls made of fear, insecurity.
Protecting our egos.
And a need to protect our fragile egos.
Yeah.
And those walls, while they might feel protective in the short term, ultimately prevent us from experiencing genuine connection.
They do.
Both with ourselves and with the world around us.
Which brings us back to the power of embracing knowledge as a tool, a map, rather than mistaking it for the absolute truth. When we're open to revising our maps, to updating our understanding based on new information and experiences, we're essentially saying yes to growth. Yes to connection.
I like that.
And yes to a more authentic and fulfilling life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Welcome back to this deep dive into knowledge versus truth. So we've talked about how our knowledge can be like a map. Helpful, but not the same as the actual terrain, and how clinging to those outdated maps can lead to self-deception.
Yeah.
We even talked about how that ties back to Dostoevsky's warning about, the dangers of lying to ourselves.
Yeah.
So now I'm really curious about those practical tips you mentioned for cultivating intellectual humility and open-mindedness.
Sure.
Where do we even begin?
Well, it's less about mastering a set of techniques. And more about cultivating a certain mindset. A way of approaching the world with curiosity. And a willingness to learn.
So it's a practice.
Yeah, think of it like strengthening a muscle, right? The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets.
So it's ongoing.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the most effective ways to do this is by actively seeking out diverse perspectives.
So reading books and articles by people with different viewpoints, listening to podcasts that challenge our beliefs.
Absolutely.
Having conversations with people who see things differently.
Totally.
Okay, so we're really getting out of our comfort zone.
It's about exposing ourselves to a wider range of ideas and experiences. Even if, and perhaps especially, if those ideas make us uncomfortable.
Right, because that discomfort can be a sign that we're growing.
That's right.
Right, it's a signal that our maps might need some updating.
Exactly.
Another practice. Asking questions.
Oh, yeah, lots of them.
Not just the ones that confirm what we already think.
Oh, no.
Right. But questions that challenge our assumptions.
Yeah.
This makes me think about that who was talking to the priest. He kept pushing him to clarify his points.
Right.
And that really helped deepen the conversation.
Absolutely. Questioning is not about being confrontational. It's about seeking understanding.
So we're cultivating curiosity and humility.
Yeah, for sure.
Another important one. Admitting when we're wrong.
Oh, that's a big one, right?
It's hard.
It can be tough.
Especially if we've been defending a belief for a long time.
Yeah, but the ability to change our minds in the face of new evidence, that's a sign of intellectual strength.
It's like that quote, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds."
Ooh, I like that one.
So if we're so afraid of being wrong,
Yeah.
we miss out on the opportunity to learn and grow.
We do.
So embracing nuance.
Yeah.
The world is rarely black and white.
It's messy.
Right? Most issues are complex.
Yeah.
So instead of jumping to conclusions or clinging to those simple explanations, we should try to see those shades of gray. It's about recognizing that there might be multiple truths, or at least multiple valid perspectives.
And our own perspective might be incomplete or even flawed.
This makes me think about the apples.
Yeah, the apple.
One apple plus one apple can equal 2 apples or 1,000 atoms.
It just depends on how you look at it.
Right. Both answers can be true depending on the context.
Right. It reminds us to be cautious about making absolute statements or assuming that our way of seeing things is the only valid way.
So much of what we've talked about today has really challenged me to examine my own relationship with knowledge and truth.
Yeah.
And I realized I need to work on this intellectual humility and open-mindedness.
Well, you're already doing that by having this conversation.
Ah, thanks.
By being willing to question your assumptions and explore these ideas.
It feels like this whole deep dive has opened up a new way of seeing the world.
Good.
A way that embraces curiosity, humility, a willingness to be surprised.
It's a journey.
Yeah.
An ongoing journey of learning.
This has been great.
Yeah.
So many aha moments for me.
I'm glad to hear that.
And I feel like I'm walking away with some tools that I can use to navigate the world with more clarity and purpose.
I love that.
So I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
And I hope this conversation has sparked your own curiosity.
Keep those maps updated.
And inspired you to keep exploring this relationship between knowledge and truth.
Absolutely. And don't lie to yourself.
Until next time, happy exploring.